The wind off the plains had teeth that night, and it was hunting her. Adaline Boothe pressed her back against the alley wall behind the copper kettle in Redwater Bend, Wyoming, and counted the coins in her palm one more time. 3 pennies. A bent nickel that no shopkeep in the territory would take. And a button she'd meant to sew back onto her mother's coat before she buried her in it, and had forgotten, and now carried like a sin. She'd been standing there long enough that the snow had crusted white on the tops of her boots, and the smell of stew coming through the back door of the kitchen had gone from cruelty to something closer to prayer. She knocked, because she had promised herself she would knock and not beg. Knocking, she had decided somewhere on the long road down from the coal camp at Bitter Fork, was a thing a person did. Begging was a thing a dog did. She had not yet given up on being a person. The door opened a crack, and a woman with flour on her forearms and suspicion in her eyes looked her up and down. "I only asked for scraps," Adaline said, before the woman could speak. Her voice came out smaller than she'd meant. "Anything the dogs won't eat. I can work for it. Wood. Dishes. I'm strong." The woman's mouth pulled tight. It wasn't cruelty in her face, exactly. It was the tired, careful arithmetic of a woman who had been asked this too many times in a hard year, and who had a son at home and a husband down at the mine and only so much stew. "We don't keep scraps," she said. "Boys out back take him for the hogs. You go on down to the church, honey. Reverend Cole hands out bread on. Reverend Cole died last month." The words came out flat. Adaline hadn't meant them to. "Church is shut." The woman's face changed then, softened at the edges, but softness didn't fill a plate. She began to say something else, something apologetic and useless, and behind her a man's voice called for a table of 6, and the door began to close. That was when the second voice came, low and unhurried, from the far end of the alley. "Ma'am, hold that door a minute." Adaline turned. He was tall enough that she noticed it first, and lean in the way men got who worked outside in every weather that God saw fit to send. His hat was pulled low against the snow. A long oilskin coat, dark from wet. Boots that had walked through more than one winter. He carried a burlap sack over one shoulder that clinked faintly, and he had a face that didn't smile, exactly, but didn't look mean either. A face that had made up its mind about something a long time ago and had stopped negotiating with the world about it. "Evenin', Mrs. Homestead," he said to the woman in the doorway. "Sorry to bother. I come to pay my tab." Mrs. Halstead's eyebrows went up. "Wesley, you ain't got a tab." "I do now," he said. "I'll take a bowl of whatever's on. 2 bowls. Bread if you got it. And I'll take 'em to that empty table in the corner, if you'll let me. Miss, if you'd be so kind as to join me." Adaline stared at him. She had spent the last 11 days walking, and 8 of them not eating, and the world had narrowed down to the kind of thin corridor grief and hunger make together. She could not, for a long second, understand what he was offering. She thought he might be one of the men her mother had warned her about, the kind who traded a meal for something else after. She looked at his hands. They were empty and hung easy at his sides. She looked at his eyes. There was nothing in them she recognized as appetite. "I don't take charity," she heard herself say. It sounded ridiculous, standing there with a button in her hand and snow in her hair. "Ain't charity," he said. "I owe Mrs. Halstead for a saddle blanket her boy fixed for me last spring, and I never squared up. You'd be doing me a favor sitting across from me, so she don't feel bad charging me double." Mrs. Halstead opened her mouth to say she'd never fixed him any saddle blanket, and then she saw the tall man's face, and she closed it again. She stepped back and held the door. "Come on and out of that wind, child," she said, and her voice had gone gentle. "Both of you." Adaline's feet did not want to move. Then they did. The cowboy, because that was what he was, from the shape of him and the sound of his spurs on the plank floor, did not offer her his arm, which was the first thing she liked about him. He simply walked half a step ahead of her to a corner table with 2 chairs, pulled one out, and sat in the other himself, so that she would not feel she had been arranged. He set his hat on the bench beside him. His hair was dark and starting to go a little gray at the temples, though he could not have been past 35. "Wesley Ainsworth," he said, when they were seated. He did not offer his hand across the table, which was the second thing she liked. She was aware, now that she was in the light, of how filthy her own hands were. "Adaline Boothe. Where you come in from, Miss Boothe?" "Bitter Fork." She swallowed. "My mother worked the boarding house up there. She took sick. When she, after, The man who owned the house said her contract was in her name, and I couldn't stay. He gave me a week to be gone. Wesley Ainsworth did not react much, but she noticed the way his jaw set for a half a second and then unset itself. How long you been walking? 11 days. Alone? She nodded. He looked at the tabletop for a moment. Then Mrs. Halstead came with 2 bowls of stew big enough to drown a man in, and a small loaf of dark bread cut into thick pieces, and a pat of yellow butter on a saucer, and coffee that steamed. She set it down softly, the way one sets a thing down near a spooked animal, and she did not linger. Eat slow, Wesley said. You've been empty a while. Your stomach'll fight you if you rush it. Adaline meant to be dignified. She meant to lift the spoon at a civilized speed. She managed 2 spoonfuls before her hands began to shake so hard she had to set the spoon down and press her palms flat against the wood. She did not cry. She had lost that ability somewhere between Bitter Fork and here, and she suspected it would come back one day and cost her. Wesley Ainsworth ate his own bowl at the same unhurried pace he did everything else, and he did not watch her, which was the third thing. I want you to pause here a moment, listener, wherever you are, perhaps in your kitchen with something warm in your own hands, perhaps out driving a long road at night, and think of the last time a stranger did a small, unshowy kindness for you. Not a rescue, not a miracle, just a chair pulled out, a bowl set down, someone deciding, quietly, that your dignity was worth the price of a meal. That's the kind of story this is. That's the kind of man Wesley Ainsworth was. He waited until she had eaten enough that her color came back before he spoke again. You got somewhere for tonight? I'll find the livery. They sometimes let a body sleep in the loft if you muck stalls at dawn. They don't. Not since the fire. Old man Kettering won't have anyone in his hay after dark. Then somewhere else. Miss Boothe. He set his spoon down. I got a place about 4 miles west. My sister lived with me till she married last spring and went to Cheyenne. Her room's empty. There's a bolt on the door on the inside. There's a stove in it. I'll sleep in the barn if it makes you easier, but you'll freeze in Redwater tonight, and I ain't fixin' to walk past you tomorrow morning in a snowbank, and no, I let it happen. She stared at him for a long moment. Why? She asked. He considered the question, the way he seemed to consider everything, as though words were coins he did not want to spend carelessly. Because my mother died walking, he said finally. Between one place and another. Nobody let her in. I was 9. I have been trying to be the man who lets people in ever since. That is the whole of it. There is no other reason. You may take it or leave it. Adaline put the button in her pocket. I will take it, she said. But I will work. Suit yourself. The road out to the Ainsworth place ran along a creek half frozen and hissing under its own ice. His wagon was old but well kept, and the mule that pulled it had the settled look of an animal that had been treated fairly for a long time. He gave her his oilskin coat, and when she started to refuse, he said, without looking at her, I got another under the seat, which was a lie she chose to accept. The house sat low against a rise, a long log-end frame place with a stone chimney at each end and a barn behind it, and a windbreak of cottonwoods along the north side. There was a lamp already lit in the front window, though no one was home, which told her he had lit it before he left, expecting to come back to it. A man who prepared a welcome for himself, she thought, was a man who had known too many dark rooms. Inside, it smelled of cedar and old wood smoke and, faintly, of lavender, his sister's, no doubt. The room he showed her had a narrow bed with a quilt on it in the wedding ring pattern, a small stove, a wash basin, and a bolt on the door exactly as promised. He built the fire himself, quickly, and left without saying anything else. She heard him go out to the barn. She bolted the door. She stood in the middle of the room for a long time. Then she sat on the floor, because the bed felt too clean for her, and she finally, cried. Morning came pale and blew through frost on the window. She woke with the sense that she was somewhere she was not permitted to be, and had to remind herself twice that she had been invited. When she opened the door to the main room, there was already coffee on the stove and a stack of clean folded clothes on the bench, a woman's shirt, a wool skirt, thick stockings, a shawl, a note in a careful, blocky hand. These were my sisters. She left them. They will be big on you. There is water heated in the kitchen. W.A. She washed. She dressed. She braided her hair. She looked in the small mirror over the basin and did not recognize the woman there, but she thought that woman looked like someone who might, given time, be worth knowing. She went out to find him. He was in the barn, forking hay, and he did not look up until she cleared her throat. I said I would work, she told him. He nodded once. Chickens need feed in. Bucket by the door. Then eggs. Then you can help me with the calves if you got a stomach for it. One's been favoring a leg. That was how it began. She stayed a week that turned into 2, and then 3, and Wesley Ainsworth did not once, in all that time, come near her door after dark or press a hand where a hand did not belong. He taught her the names of the horses, Judge and Waltz and Blossom, the old mare, and he taught her which of the barn cats would let a person pick them up and which would take a finger off. He was not a talker, but when he did speak he said things worth listening to, and she learned that he read at night, by lamplight, and that his sister's books were still on the shelf. A volume of Longfellow, a battered Pilgrim's Progress, a King James Bible with a name written inside in a woman's hand. Ruth Ainsworth, 1868. She asked about Ruth once, and he said only, "My sister. She lives in Cheyenne now. She writes." And she understood not to press further. The trouble began the way trouble usually begins in a small town, which is to say through the mouth of a person with too much time and too little to lose. Redwater Bend had a woman named Verna Pruitt who owned the dry goods store on Front Street and who had, in her own opinion, been overlooked by Wesley Ainsworth in the matter of matrimony for nearly 6 years running. She had brought him pies. She had asked after his sister. She had done everything a woman of her position and standing could do without being unseemly. And now there was, apparently, a girl living out at his place. A girl nobody had heard of. A girl who had walked into town with 3 cents in her hand. Verna Pruitt was not the kind of woman who slandered outright. She was the kind of woman who wondered aloud, in front of the right people, whether it was Christian. She wondered aloud whether the girl had a husband somewhere she had left. She wondered aloud whether the girl was who she said she was. And she wondered aloud, loudest of all, to Sheriff Aldous Merrick, whether it might not be worth a ride out to the Ainsworth place, just to see. Sheriff Merrick was a decent enough man who did not much like being used, but he also did not much like ignoring a citizen, so on a bright cold Thursday he rode out. Adaline was in the yard hanging washing when he came. She had gotten strong enough in 3 weeks to lift a full basket without her arms shaking. Her hair had color in it again. She looked, Sheriff Merrick would later admit to his wife, nothing like a runaway wife or a woman up to no good. She looked like a woman hanging washing. He tipped his hat. "Mississippi. Sheriff. Wesley about. He's out with the calves. I can fetch him. Don't trouble yourself. I'll wait." She offered him coffee. He took it. They sat on the porch. He asked her a few careful questions, and she answered them plainly. Bitter Fork. The boarding house. Her mother's name, Hannah Boothe. Her father, dead at Antietam before she was born. She had a letter, she said, from the minister at Bitter Fork, if he wanted to see it. She fetched it. It was creased soft from being carried. It said what she had said it said. Sheriff Merrick read it twice. "Miss Boothe," he said, folding it back up. "I have known Wesley Ainsworth 11 years, and there is not a straighter man in this county. I do not doubt you, but I am going to tell you something, and I would like you to hear it as a kindness, because it is meant as one. There are people in Redwater who will not let this be. Not because it is wrong, because it is interesting, and they are bored. You understand?" She nodded. "There will be talk that will hurt him more than it hurts you, because he is the one who lives here and will still be living here when you have moved on. You think on that. You are welcome in Redwater. But so is he." He left without seeing Wesley. She stood on the porch a long time after his horse was gone. That evening she told Wesley about the visit, all of it, plainly. He listened the way he always listened, with his hands still and his eyes on hers. And when she was done, he said, "Verna Pruitt. You know already? I have known Verna Pruitt since she was 12. I know what she does when she does not get what she wants." He was quiet a moment. "You want to leave?" "No." "You want to stay?" "Yes. But not if it costs you." He looked at her. It was the longest he had ever looked at her, and she felt it not as a weight, but as a question being asked with great care. "Miss Boothe," he said, "there is something I ought to have told you and did not. My sister Ruth did not go to Cheyenne to be married. She went to Cheyenne to get away from a man in this town who thought she owed him her attention because he had once bought her a ribbon. When she left, that man told everyone in Redwater that she had run because of me, that I was cruel to her, that I drove her out. Some believed him. Some did not. I did not defend myself, because Ruth asked me not to, because she wanted the thing done and buried. I have carried that 6 years. I am telling you now because if you stay you will hear it, and I would rather you hear it from me." Adaline was quiet a long time. "Who was the man?" she asked. "Verna Pruitt's brother," said Wesley. "Deacon Pruitt. Runs the freight office." "Oh, yes." She looked out at the last light on the cottonwoods. She thought of her mother, and of the boarding house, and of the 11 days on the road, and of the button in her pocket that she still, from habit, sometimes touched. "I am not going to leave," she said, "and I am not going to let a woman with too many pies decide what my life looks like. But I would like to write to your sister, if I may. I would like her to know a woman is living in her room. I would like her to hear it from me before anyone else tells her a version." Wesley Ainsworth, who did not smile easily, smiled then. It was small and did not last long. But it was a real smile, and she saw it, and she kept it. Ruth Ainsworth wrote back inside 2 weeks. Her letter was long and warm and specific, and it contained, near the end, a sentence that Adaline read aloud to Wesley at the kitchen table by lamplight. "If Verna Pruitt gives you any trouble, tell her I said hello. Tell her I said I remember the ribbon." Wesley set down his coffee. "What ribbon?" Adaline asked. "Ruth kept it," he said slowly. "The one Deacon gave her. She kept it because he had written his initials on the back of the paper it was wrapped in, along with words a decent man does not put on a paper he gives a 16-year-old girl. She kept it as evidence, in case she ever needed it. She left it with me when she went. And you still have it." "I do." "Wesley, I know. They did not act on it that night. They acted on it the following Sunday, after church, when the congregation had spilled out onto the steps and Verna Pruitt was holding court about the goings-on at the Ainsworth place, and her brother Deacon stood at her elbow with the tolerant look of a man who was enjoying being defended. Wesley walked up with Adaline on his arm, which was the first surprise. He tipped his hat to Verna, which was the second, and he handed Deacon Pruitt a folded piece of yellowed paper, which was the third. "You dropped this 6 years ago," Wesley said, in a voice that was not loud but which carried, because the crowd had gone quiet the way crowds do when they sense something. "I have been meaning to return it." Deacon Pruitt opened the paper. His face did a thing that could not be called anything but a collapse. He tried to close it. He could not close it fast enough. The woman standing next to Verna, who happened to be the minister's wife, had already seen. Verna Pruitt reached for it. Her brother pulled it back. But the minister's wife had read enough, and the minister's wife was not a woman who forgot what she read. There was no shouting. There was no fight. That was not how Redwater Bend worked. What happened instead, over the next 2 months, was quieter and more thorough. Deacon Pruitt was voted off the church board. The freight office lost 2 of its biggest contracts to a competitor in Casper. Verna Pruitt stopped wondering aloud about anything, because no one was listening anymore. By spring, the Pruitts had sold up and gone to Nebraska, and Redwater Bend did not miss them. Adaline stayed. She stayed through the spring calving, and through the summer when the creek ran clean, and through the fall when the cottonwoods went gold along the windbreak. And by the second winter, she was not a girl in a borrowed shirt anymore, but a woman in her own, and the room with the bolt on the door was still hers, though the bolt, by then, was mostly ornamental. Wesley Ainsworth asked her to marry him on a plain Tuesday in November, in the kitchen, with flour on his hands from a bread he was, badly, trying to bake. He did not kneel. He did not make a speech. He said, "Adaline, I would like this house to be yours as much as it is mine, and I would like your name on the deed, and I would like you to stay for as long as you would like to stay, which I hope is a long time. Will you marry me?" She said, "Yes, Wesley," and then she showed him how to knead the bread properly, because he had been doing it wrong, and he laughed for the first time she had ever heard, and it was a good sound, and it filled the room. They were married in the spring, in the churchyard, by the new minister, with Ruth Ainsworth standing beside her brother and holding Adaline's bouquet. Mrs. Halstead from the copper kettle brought a stew big enough for the whole town, and the whole town, mostly, came. Adaline kept the button. She kept it in a small tin box on the mantel, next to Ruth's ribbon, which Ruth had told her to keep as a reminder that the small evidences of a life are worth holding on to, because you never know which one will one day save you. Years later, when she was asked, and she was, sometimes, by younger women who had come to her door hungry the way she had once come to another door hungry, what she had learned from all of it, she said only one thing. And she said it plain. A hungry woman does not need much. She needs one door that opens the first time she knocks. Then she would send them home with bread wrapped in a cloth and stew in a covered pot, and a note pinned to the cloth that gave the road out to the Ainsworth place, in case they had nowhere else to go. And that, listener, is where we will leave them, Adaline and Wesley Ainsworth, in a low log house against a rise, with a lamp already lit in the window against the coming dark, and a bolt on a door that no longer needs it, and a tin box on the mantel holding a button and a ribbon, and the whole small, stubborn history of two people who chose, on separate nights and for separate reasons, to let someone in. If this story warmed you the way that Stu warmed her, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I like to picture the kitchens and the porches and the long roads where these stories find you. And stay close. There are more of them coming, and the lamp is already lit.